Hello, everybody. It's the Mike Rinder show.
The John Atack show.
Oh yeah, I forgot that for a minute there. Um, my we've been doing this for a while now, eh, Mike?
Yeah,
It's
we have.
always a pleasure. So
Yes.
far, so far, it's always a pleasure. You might send me to ethics at any point. Who knows? If I
Yeah.
say something scurrilous about the founder or something,
I might send a PI to sit outside your house, John.
Yeah, it has happened before, oddly enough.
Oh,
I went on a holiday to Cyprus in 1995, and family holiday, and we knew there were two PIs. I live in a cul-de-sac. We knew there were two PIs in the car watching, and I had to be smuggled out of the house at 6 o'clock in the morning to go through the school grounds next door so I could go on holiday without being followed by these bloody people. Oh well, but yeah, all good fun. It's all in our past now, that sort of thing. Hopefully, except now, yeah, now you get it as well.
exactly.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I'd been talking with Yuval Laor, who's going to be publishing a book where he's talking about awe, fervor, belief, and this kind of thing. And I've for a long time have said that one of the reasons people stick to Scientology is because of peak experiences. That I think probably for members of the Sea Org, there's a lot of trauma bonding going on as well. The other end of it works too. So I just wondered, I talked with Chris Shelton the other day, and he gave me a couple of interesting experiences he'd had. It getting high, it's euphoria, the very good indicators. Did you have any significant experiences like that in Scientology, or was it just the presence of Ron Hubbard that made you feel you were floating?
Well, there certainly were, although, if I sit here trying to think through, well, what was it exactly? I can't pinpoint something that I go, oh yeah, this I felt amazing. I do recall when I was getting grades auditing, and particularly grade 0, where you address communication.
Yeah.
That I felt very euphoric about suddenly realizing my that what I believed were inabilities or inhibitions to communicating with people or about certain things had suddenly vanished.
Yeah.
And that is that great sort of rush of, oh my God, I'm life's so wonderful, everything's amazing. And there are things about that sort of zone of Scientology, the grades, where the auditing is, apart from grade 2, where the auditing is sort of less repressive in some way. It's like asking open-ended questions of you that you just get to answer however you want, and there's no real judgment about your answers on those. In sec checking and in Dianetics and in false purpose rundown and a lot of other auditing in Scientology, there is a focus on whether you are being accurate and honest, and that puts a lot of pressure on you when you're the recipient of the auditing. In those grades processes, there's very little of that. It's literally open-ended questions that you just get to answer for as long as you want to answer them, until you feel like, oh, I feel better about this. And whether you really do feel better, or whether this is part of and I don't know what you call that, really. I sort of loosely talk about the placebo effect, but I'm not sure that's an accurate explanation of it. I'm sure you've got a better technical term, John. But when you are told that, look, we're going to do this, and the result of that will be X. Like, I'm going to give you a pill and your headache is going to go away. Or I'm going to ask you these questions and your inhibitions about communication are going to go away.
Mm.
The very fact that you believe that that is what is going to happen has an influence on what happens and how you feel about it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure whether the results and particularly in Scientology, where there is an expectation and a requirement that at the end of each one of these things that you participate in, you have reached a certain end phenomena, is what it's called in Scientology, that you are supposed to express and demonstrate that you have accomplished whatever that is that's laid out by Hubbard as, here is the end phenomena of this particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that everybody around you is expecting that that's what you're going to say and that's what you're going to manifest, is another part that kind of feeds into this, you know, is this real, or is this I'm wanting to fit the mold of what is expected of me. I've been told that this is what will happen if I participate in this particular thing, that I will have, you know, whatever powers and abilities that I have now gained, and that I don't want to be a pariah. I don't want to be a no case gain. You know, in Scientology, there is a lot of stigma associated with not achieving what Hubbard says that you will achieve. So there are all these factors that go into this. So is this a peak experience based on actual experience, or is it a peak experience based on what I loosely call the placebo effect? You know, I don't know, but I know that I felt good. I don't know that the euphoria itself was, or the feeling of high itself was not real. What caused it, I don't know exactly. I wouldn't be willing to say, well, it was because of those processes that's what you say as a Scientologist. But I look back now and I go, I'm not really sure. But then on the other hand, hey, a feeling like that is something that is pleasurable and enjoyable and something that you want. So is a fake one or one caused by your own ideas lesser than one caused by someone else's something that they do to you? I don't know. You're like, we're in the deep philosophical zones here, John.
Well, we're in the deep psychological zones, certainly. And
all right,
I think you're absolutely right. And I think the placebo effect is an aspect of it. My little buzz phrase is expectation, conditions, experience. That
excellent.
And I think you've given good detail of how that happens, that you have an expectation. If you talk about somebody going to a psychotherapist, the fact that they're going to a psychotherapist means that they've granted authority to that person. They're saying, I think you can maybe fix this. So there's that hope. If you then look at the nocebo effect, where you give morphine to somebody and tell them it's a saline solution and they don't get the effect, then you start finding that there's something tremendously powerful inside a human being. So, you know, we can dismiss a real effect because of this thing called placebo. And I think there's a clue in Dianetics, the mental science of modern health, as I like to think of it, because
perfect. I love that. I've never heard anyone say that before. That is so perfect.
It's so ridiculously obvious, isn't it? Yeah. It's taken me nearly 40, well, actually it's 50 years now, isn't it? Oh God, since I got involved in Scientology. How old I've become. But Hubbard uses the word reverie.
Right.
And it's a very suspect word because it was used by other hypnotists, and he himself, as we know, practiced hypnosis from the age of 16 and said, never believe a hypnotist. And so that there might be a bit of a clue in there. But reverie was a term standardly used by hypnotists to mean a state of mind that is like daydreaming, which is where the word originally comes from, so that you're sort of not quite in the world. Now, hypnotists talk about altered states, and I took this up with Steve Hassan the other week, that I don't like this term because that presumes that there's a kind of normal state and there are these altered states around it. And I think that reverie, daydreaming, that state that we have just before we fall asleep, which is called a hypnagogic reverie, or the state when we're waking up, a hypnopompic reverie. Those states you are halfway in your brain into theta waves, or theta waves, depending whether you take the British or the American pronunciation, rather than beta, beta, or alpha. Thankfully, there's only one way of pronouncing alpha, I think. But so you are actually partly in a dream state in reverie. So your credulity rises amazingly. You're willing to believe things. And in 1951, a year after the mental science of modern health, Hubbard cancelled the original method. And this seems to have been completely lost, but it's in the book Science of Survival. He says you mustn't use this method because it's hypnotic. So it's an absolutely straightforward admission on his part that the reverie state is a hypnotic state where you'll see the flickering of the eyelids. And it was all reintroduced in 1977 and has been run ever since, putting people into what some would call trance states or altered states, where they're more suggestible, they're more likely to believe things. So one of the, when I realized, having left Scientology, that I'd spent 9 years studying a form of hypnosis, whatever else you wanted to call it. I was guiding people's imagination. I was directing them towards something in their mind. That would often lead to past life experiences, which were none of them ever verified in the slightest detail. They couldn't.
Oh, John, you have not read Mission into Time?
Yeah, I've read it, and I've of course interviewed Hannah Whitfield, who was the captain of the project, and said, yes, we did find some bottle tops where he said the treasure would be. Yeah, complete and abject failure. Or Have You Lived Before This Life? And I've got the first edition of that, where you find that one of the auditors and preclears was Cyril Vosper, because they're named in the first edition. So they had to scrub that out a bit quickly. And Cyril went to his grave still believing in reincarnation. I put an interview that was done of him with him for The Secret Life of L. Ron Hubbard, which is still, I think, the second best documentary after The Shrinking World of L. Ron Hubbard, which is my all-time favorite. But he's 30 seconds in the actual documentary, but I got all the 30 or 40 minutes that he did. And Tony Ortega has that up on his site. And to my amazement, having known Cyril for years, he's going, I think there might be something in this past life. Okay, fine. So Have You Lived Before This Life? Yeah, great. But people will, you never evaluate for the preclear, but the preclear has read 6 L. Ron Hubbard books before going into session and been told what he or she is going to experience. So you have the expectation of these things. I remember my first past life memory, which was in a self-analysis session about 6 months after I got in. And I had this very vivid sense of walking through the desert in Israel or Judea, in that part of the world, at the time of Christ. I don't know why I knew it was at the time of Christ, or why I thought it was at the time of Christ. And thankfully, unlike, according to Karen de la Carrière, 200 preclears that whose folders she looked at, I didn't believe I was Jesus.
Oh, John,
so
you're like missing something. Like, you're not really with the program if you're not.
I did think I'd been the Buddha. So,
okay, good. Well,
but then when
happy
I
to
found
hear
out
that.
about body thetans, I realized that everybody could have had a little slice of the Buddha or Jesus. But so you've got this expectation, and then you've got these states of mind that you can move somebody into. And in a reverie state, light hypnotic trance, some people call it, you are more credulous. You're more willing to believe things. So you've got the expectation. You're in a state where you're willing to believe things. And there's a little phrase in the training routines. Shortly after I left, I was on my mission to talk to people about the mother cult and how terrible it was, because I fervently believed in Scientology. I'd left because I thought Ron Hubbard was gone and I wanted to preserve this wonderful thing. And so I was going out, I'd been given a list of people who might be disaffected, and I went and saw them. You probably went and saw them after I did, but and I sat with this woman and I gave her the spiel, and she just kept looking at me with this rather anxious eye and thinking, I'm really not getting anywhere with this. And then after half an hour, she looked at me and she said, does that mean I don't have to do it anymore? And I went, yeah, you don't have to do it anymore. She said, oh, thank God for that. It then turned out that she spent 15 years on training routine 0 because she'd observed something that the rest of us were willing to just push aside. She said, how can I know that it's a major, stable win that I've achieved here? How do I know it's stable? And you go, scientifically, you know, she's absolutely correct. You can't know that it will persist through your lifetime. And that's one of the tricks written into Scientology, that you will agree to things that are not true to make progress to the next step. Right. You will sign off, you know, so you did your grade 0 and you were able to communicate freely with anyone on any subject. That's one of the end phenomena. As long as they weren't a declared suppressive person, as long as you weren't talking about your case or problems you had, and as long as you weren't talking about Scientology as verbal technology, you could communicate freely with almost anyone on almost any subject. And you start realizing, and absolutes are unobtainable, didn't Ron say? So you wouldn't ever be able to do that. And you're in this little trap of wanting to fulfill the criteria, wanting to be an operating thetan. And any inference you get of it, I mean, I had the other thing running all the way through Scientology. I wanted to be enlightened. I'd come from a Buddhist background. And for 40 years, from the age of about 17 to about 10 years ago, right through Scientology and 30 years beyond, that was still my goal, until one day I went, I'm not going to do this. This isn't going to happen. And what happens is every few months, you're kind of going, have I achieved it? Am I there now? Am I in native state? Am I a cleared theta clear or whatever? And when you feel high, you feel you're on top of the world. You can do anything. You have superpowers. And you move into that area, which I think is very important and creates auditing junkies, people who've got to have more.
Right. And I think you brought up something that's really interesting. You know, if you look at what the end phenomena are of every step of the grade chart, when they used to put that on there, I mean, they stopped doing that, but you can still find it pretty easily. And you know,
an old copy of Scientology 0.8 will have it up to 74.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I have a couple of
all
them
the
right
OT
behind
levels.
me. Yep, everything. Yep. But you know, like you get to OT3, freedom from overwhelm.
Freedom from overwhelm.
Now I have seen a lot of OT3s who are exceedingly overwhelmed, myself included.
Yeah.
Like I was, like I write about it in my book, like when I was at one point holding like 7 WDC member posts and the chief officer of CMO International and a watch messenger, and I was sleeping like 3 hours a night and having, you know, would come in every day after 3 hours of sleep with 500 telexes to answer. I was overwhelmed. I mean, so overwhelmed. I couldn't see past the next 20 minutes of my life.
Yeah.
Like, it was literally that. My world was that confined. It was, what's the next thing I have to do and how am I going to get through that?
Yeah.
And that was as far as I could think in the future. And I was OT3. In fact, I was OT5. And that you see all the time. You know, you go to the L's, and the L's is supposed to be, you know, stably exterior with full perception. Like, oh yeah, I have yet to meet one person that can demonstrate that. Like, forget the stably. Let's just have the exterior with full perception. Okay, so if you're exterior with full perception, tell me what's going on the other side of the wall over there. Like, tell me what's going on 30 feet behind your head. Just that. Yeah. Just one little thing. And you know, they did those the Ugo Swan and whoever those other people were that were supposedly doing all this stuff for the CIA, and you know, of exterior perception and this and that. Never amounted a hill of beans. And yet that is still sold to Scientologists to this day. $40,000 a pop for a 12.5-hour intensive of L10 or L11 or L12, whichever one of those three is supposed to do that. And they still write success stories saying that they have achieved this miraculous ability.
I had a thing from somebody who edited Advance magazine who basically said, well, somebody's bound to have done this, so I wrote the success story. So
my God.
And Ingo Swan got into a firefight with me about 95, 96 because I criticized the Spoonbenders, the Men Who Stare at Goats program, rather loudly, and Hal Puthoff wrote, you know, to say that he'd not been that involved in Scientology, the physicist who did this, the Stanford Research Institute stuff, which sold so many copies of the books. And he said, I wasn't that involved. And I had to say, but you did OT3, and I met your wife doing OT5 in 1986. So, you know, I think there was something going on there. But bless him, he doesn't want his reputation sullying, and I do understand that. Too late now. But Ingo said that he had all of these abilities before he came to Scientology. And he did indeed work for the CIA, and they spent millions on this bogus project, which collapsed around the time of the First Gulf War, when they had psychics targeting missiles. So we are told. Oh dear. And Ingo, of course, was also collaborating. There's a paper that I unearthed a couple of years ago. He was collaborating with the Soviet Union on their psychic program too. So he's a little bit suspect. But he did say his psychic abilities had nothing to do with Scientology. So as yet, they've not produced anybody that can do this, any of this stuff. But you're off in that dream world of the reverie of anything is possible. Of, Otto Rose, who one of only 5 Class 12s, the highest level of Scientology, 5 Class 12s trained by Hubbard himself, Hubbard's own counselor, auditor, case supervisor, all of that stuff. The only person to do OT8, I think, before 1988, did it in 71, I think. And, big fan of Scientology still. And, I came to know him quite well, interviewed him at length. And he said that he'd once been exterior. In all of this time, he'd once been exterior. And then he spoiled it because he said that during the experience, he saw the Apollo, the flagship, split in two. And you go, that probably really didn't happen, did it?
Oh, my God.
And a lot of it's about bliss states. I got very interested in Sufi ideas in Islam, and firstly because of the great poet Rumi and the great poet Hafez, that these guys have really got something going. So I wanted to understand their ideas a bit better, and I read tens of books about this. And one of the things that really struck me was that every now and then you'd have an account of somebody who'd entered a bliss state and then stayed there for 40 years. And then they'd wake up one day and they'd have no idea of what the past 40 years had been. And I think that kind of super infatuated state it seems so desirable, but it's like the Midas touch. You know, you won't be able to touch anything afterwards, and you'll just be that, you know, you just be in this bubble of bliss for however many years. You won't do anything, you won't help anybody, you won't do any good in the world, and people probably have to give you baby food to keep you going. And I think Scientology, it's not understanding what the true end phenomena of Scientology are, which is probably being out of your head. Oh yeah, it is. It's being out of your head. It's being out of your mind. And when I say this to people, they don't necessarily register. Be 3 feet back of your head. So you're going to drive your car 3 feet back of your head, right? You're going to work on, how is that an advantage? Being out of your head, being out of your mind. Yet there is all of this enthusiasm. First thing I learned, I say, I spent 9 years studying hypnosis, whatever we want to call it. That's what it was. And so I wanted to understand what that was so I wouldn't do it anymore. Many of my friends went, and 4 of my friends went and studied neuro-linguistic programming so they could do it more. And I would not do any training in hypnosis. I read about it. I talked to it, and hypnotherapists and hypnotists. And one of the first things I was told is that in a hypnotic trance state, you feel euphoric. And I went, so the end phenomena for almost all Scientology procedures is a cognition, a realization, and very good indicators. And it's that non-rational state where you feel high. And I don't know. I mean, being around Hubbard, it strikes me that, you know, one of the things that really put me off after I left and made me reconsider my involvement was finding out what a horrible temper L. Ron Hubbard had, and how vicious he was to people, the horrific things he said to people that would demoralize and undermine them, which seemed the opposite of the idea of Dianetics, where you're reducing trauma and getting rid of it. Did he also become, you know, exhilarated and exuberant when you were around him? Did he seem blissful or pleased or ecstatic or any elated or any of those things?
At small moments. And I would see that more during the time that I interacted with him on the Apollo than later when he was at La Quinta. Because when he was at La Quinta, life was not really good. You know, he was trying to shoot those movies and they were such crap and everybody was fucking up. And the FBI was, you know, going to raid the property, and Mary Sue had been arrested and being prosecuted. And then he got deathly ill and had a heart attack or a stroke. I can't remember which. And, you know, Mayo had been brought there to audit him. That was resulted in the development of knots. And like, it was a very, very stressful time. And he was a very stressed out kind of guy. I saw him on the Apollo you know, in moments of happiness and enjoying himself, like when we were showing the movies on the off well deck. And he'd sit down there and he was very gregarious, and, you know, he'd hold court outside of his research room on the prom deck at the end of the night, and the aides would all be out there standing around, and a group would gather, and he'd be telling stories, and, you know, this is going on, and, you know, AOLA made $200,000, and like that sort of happy state of Hubbard was more to the fore on the Apollo than when I subsequently spent more time with him, like 24/7. Like, I was a watch messenger there. I was not on the ship. I wasn't even in the Commodore's messenger org. But when I was at La Quinta, I was a watch messenger. So I was with him, attending him in 6-hour shifts, 24/7. Like, I wasn't there 24 hours. I was there 6, but one day it might be 6 a.m. to noon. The next day it might be 6 p.m. to midnight, you know, but Yeah, I mean, I often get asked about this comparison between Miscavige and Hubbard, and I usually say, well, both are sociopaths. Miscavige just doesn't seem to have any redeeming qualities. His when you see Miscavige being gregarious or friendly or whatever in any way, shape, or form, it's like a show, an act.
Just to
Like
get
he's
something.
doing it to accomplish some end. I saw Hubbard just genuinely being happy about whatever it was that was going on, a movie or something, some information that had been reported to him or whatever, just chatting with the aides or Mary Sue or, messengers. So yeah, there was some of that with Hubbard. It wasn't it wasn't his normal state. Let me put it that way. But it wasn't that unusual, particularly back in those Apollo days. And I think that side of Hubbard probably diminished as the years went by.
So the tech didn't work.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, that's absolutely true, John. That's a very apt observation. But I've talked to people that spent time with him on the briefing course at St. Hill and talk about how, he was sort of easygoing, a kind of saunter in and make jokes and slap people on the back, and it's great to see you today, and that sort of stuff. And certainly in the Seog years, that never happened. That was not his demeanor in any way, shape, or form.
Well, he talks about altitude as a way of. He says that if somebody has altitude over you, then they become a hypnotic operator. Those are his exact words in a lecture in, I think, 1951, 52. And it's an astute observation. And you used a phrase there that I think probably sums it up. When he was holding court, as I investigated Scientology, to me, the parallels of my investigation, it started by, I was interviewing Bill Robertson, Otto Rose, Hannah Whitfield, Dee Vogading, so on and so on, just a whole bunch of Scientology luminaries that I was corresponding with or talking with. And I just got this feeling it was kind of like researching Henry VIII and having access to, Thomas Cromwell and Bishop Cranmer and what have you. And more as I thought about it, Hubbard seemed like a kind of Henry VIII character, though not courageous in the battlefield as Henry VIII probably would have been, but tyrannical. And that sense of, on the Apollo, he was the divine principle. He was, the chosen one, and everybody adulated him. And if we view him as a narcissist, and I do, somebody who does not have a completed self, somebody who hasn't matured and hasn't grown up, such people, because they cannot feel love and they want to be loved, they want to be adulated. So being surrounded by his courtiers with no opposition, and then, as you say, it was Kurosawa, wasn't it, where he had the first heart attack in 74 or something? And from there, his health is deteriorating and his mind is deteriorating. And he still has to maintain this pretense that he is the great OT, which of course, followers allowed him, talking with somebody like Hannah afterwards and going, well, what was he really like? And she has all sorts of interesting observations, having been thoroughly devoted to him.
Yes.
For so many years. And then coming back and going, well, actually, he did some pretty despicable things. You also said you'd be on watch for 6 hours, and that might be 6 a.m. till noon. What was his normal sleeping habit?
Weird. I mean, he would go to sleep or go to bed around midnight, and John, believe it or not, wake up at 4 a.m. and give himself a session and then go back to sleep and then wake up at 6 a.m. and perhaps give himself another session and then go back to sleep again and get up at 8. And I remember like this like really struck me the first time, because this is not something that's talked about. And it's just like, oh, realize you're going on the midnight to 6 a.m. shift now. Realize the Commodore is going to wake up at 3 or 4 and go in session. I'm like, what? In the middle of the night? Wait a minute. This is contrary to everything that you read anywhere about sessionability and when you're supposed to audit someone, and you're not supposed to audit late at night, and you're not supposed to audit them on no sleep, and you're not supposed, like all of these things. And I'm like, gosh, this is the suspended credulity that you get when you are around someone like that, and every Scientologist does the Ron can do whatever he wants because he is source. So while the rules may apply to everybody else, they don't necessarily apply to Ron. And that was actually the second thing that had happened when I was out there at La Quinta, because the first was because of my case level at the time, OT3, I was one of the messengers who was sort of involved in at that time, the write-up that David Mayo was doing of what knots consisted of.
Right.
And the submissions that were going to Hubbard that Mayo had written up based on what Hubbard had told him. This is what you need. This is what, you need to write this down. You need to write that down. And I got to read a bunch of these submissions. There was one messenger, Melanie Murray, who was Melanie Seidler. Her dad was a George Seidler, the one of the early mission holders, I think in Champaign-Urbana or somewhere. And she was sort of a bit of a prodigy. She was a Class 8 auditor, but was also a Commodore's messenger because she was young. And she was the one that was like the liaison between Mayo and Hubbard because she was a watch messenger. So I got to see a bunch of these things. And I'm like, wait a minute. Hubbard is in the middle of a session telling David Mayo, now ask me this.
Yeah.
Now, what is the meter saying? Now, let me look at the meter. Let me see what reaction is happening here. I'm like, wait a minute. This is, I mean, I know to a normal, regular person, that doesn't sound that outrageous. To a Scientologist, this is perhaps the most outrageous thing that you can imagine as a violation of standard tech. The preclear, the person being audited, never tells the auditor what, or they can try to tell the auditor what to do, but an auditor that listens to a preclear telling them this is what you should be doing next, or this is the question you should be asking me, or whatever, the standard response from any auditor to that question is, have I missed a withhold on you? This is absolutely verboten. Like, I can't stress it enough, John, how bizarre this concept is. But it was Hubbard.
And I encountered this in 1986. I interviewed David Mayo at Palo Alto for 3 hours. I mean, I spent in all a month there talking with him off and on, but I did a formal interview of 3 hours. And in that interview, of course, the essential thing at that time, his Advanced Ability Center, as it then was, he was being sued and millions were spent on that case. I mean, there was a point where I helped them recover $2.9 million in costs because the lawyers were just lost. They didn't know how to do it or how to go about it. And I got $1,000 for doing that. Thank you very much. I'm not very good at things like that, as you probably work out. But I remember being, I didn't believe in Scientology anymore, but I was absolutely staggered when David Mayo said, "Oh yeah, I started doing the auditing, and it wasn't really about body thetans." That was the first thing. It was like, okay, it's not really about body thetans. It was about misownership. It was about taking on the emotions that might belong to a body thetan or someone else. But that was where we cracked Hubbard's case and got him coming back. Or actually the disease went into remission. There are different ways of looking at this, because it did happen every winter, didn't he? He got bronchitis, and that came the clearing course, OT3 there. Oh wow, I've cured my bronchitis. It's like, well, okay, maybe till next year.
Quitting smoking might have helped.
Yeah, and eventually, about 3 years before he died, we told that he did do that. I remember,
he did.
Kim Douglas, the Armstrong trial, saying that it was something like he'd cut down from 100 to 80 cigarettes a day, and you're going, this is a man who's got superpowers. And then I had some messengers say that he'd said to her, "I wish I could quit smoking," and you're going, you can't even do that. I did that in a day, no problem. But Mayo said that Hubbard would suddenly stop him and say, "Write this down." And when you look at the bulletins, and I have, they are mainly written by Hubbard.
Yes.
And they're dictated to Mayo. So we were in this terrible situation in '86. If I went public with what Mayo had told me, then Scientology would win its case against him, because he did not develop OT5. And, and by I talked with him in 2013 after many years, and it was a different man. He was in such a good place as a human being, and at Palo Alto, with all of the adulation and stuff around him, he really wasn't happy. But finding out, and that the evening I interviewed him, I went and talked with this guy I'd never met before, who was introduced to me, who'd done OT levels, and he just collapsed when I told him this. And then he told me he'd spent $400,000 on new era Dynetics for operating Thetans OT5, and he was feeling a little bit like he ought to get his money back after hearing that Hubbard had just made this stuff up on the moment and added it to the myth of his own recovery, the idea that his recovery had come about because of this incredible material, this incredible new material, which boiled down to just one thing: there may be thoughts in your head that don't belong to you.
Right. Yes, that is the entirety of the philosophy of knots.
Yeah,
you're right. They distill it down, and that is all it is. And that you brought something up that I had made a little note of on my pad here to go back to, because I think that there is another factor when we talk about these peak experiences and what people are willing to say and what they are willing to portray to the world about what they have accomplished. And that is this idea of, sunk cost. Whether it is, whether it is money, and money is a big motivating factor in that for a lot of people, or simply time and reputation, which I think is an even bigger factor for even more people, particularly reputation. You don't want to have to admit that you got suckered. Nobody wants to have to admit that. Nobody wants to say, well, yeah, I was out there telling everybody this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, to quote my old buddy David Gaiman, that this is something that you need to be involved in because it's giving me such incredible results and my life is going so well because of it. And then turn around and go, not so much. Didn't really happen. It takes some level of I don't know what the right word is. Self-introspection, honesty,
humility.
Humility. It's like a whole bunch of factors that go into it to go, yeah, this really didn't happen. I'm sorry, I was caught up in the moment or caught up in the thing or gave all my money or felt stupid or whatever. But I do believe that that is a significant factor in why people go along with so much of the bullshit, because they're afraid that if they now change course and do a 180, they're going to look stupid.
Yeah, absolutely. You've made an investment. You know, the Nigerian prince has had $200 from you, now wants 500 more. A book called Weapons of Fraud, which is by Anthony Pratt-Karnes. He investigates. He co-authored Age of Propaganda, which is a must-read about the history of propaganda and public relations. But brilliant guy. But there's this one case where a woman is bilked, I think, out of $300,000. She's got her whole family telling her to stop giving money to this scammer. She ends up with no house and her family not talking to her anymore. And it's all over a telephone scam. This person has Robert Cialdini in his book Influence calls it consistency or commitment. That once you go, I think of it as inertia. Once you are moving in a certain direction, and also accepting that, admitting to people that you used to be a Scientologist is considered far worse than saying you were a rapist and serial killer in us. It's like you can confess to having snorted cocaine and still become president. 2 US presidents have done that. But if you say I was involved with Scientology, people are like, oh yeah, keep away from him. He's a loser, So the society does make it, and you can be a reformed criminal, you can be whatever, but if you were a cult member, you're a gullible person and not very bright, which I hopefully have demonstrated through the 400 videos on my channel. And in fact, I have a friend, Kapta Akhmedova, who studied terrorism, and she's one of the people that really studied it rather than writing about it, which is what most people do. So she actually interviewed a lot of Black Widows, suicide bombers, failed suicide bombers in Chechnya. And I contacted her first because she'd also been involved in getting a couple of hundred people, maybe 100 people who were suffering from mass sociogenic illness out of hospital in Chechnya. And there were 2 schools where kids started projectile vomiting and all sorts of horrible things. And she was the only person, she was a professor of psychology, she was the only person in Chechnya who was trained in cognitive therapy. And she had to gradually, one by one, over a 2-year period, I think, deal with these people and they all got out of hospital. They all survived. But what they'd had was what used to be called mass hysteria. The witches of Salem and the devils of what have you, that kind of thing. And so I contacted her because I wanted to use that story in my book, Opening Our Minds, and she was great. She gave me all the details. It was wonderful. And I'd just got 2 slim press articles about it. But when I first contacted her, she said, I loved your book. And I'm thinking, what is a psychologist from Chechnya doing reading Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky? That was really quite odd. And then she said, I use it all the time. And when I came to want, new puff pieces, when I re-released the expanded edition, the unexpurgated edition, she explained, and it's in there in the book, that basically she's dealing with radicalization, and she's saying, look, even a relatively intelligent man like John Atack can get scammed all the way up the river. So it's like, oh, thanks.
Oh dear.
So yeah,
At least you're relatively intelligent, John.
Relatively, yeah. But there's so much that one of the debates I get into is overcritical thinking, things like the sunk cost fallacy, and understanding those things. It's very useful, but it won't save you.
Yes.
Because if you're greedy or you're lustful or, you're frightened or you're boxed in because all your friends are doing it, critical thinking becomes something that you use to justify what you're doing. And, it's those things that bypass reasoning and go for our emotions that become significant. And, in this case, peak experiences, that the year after I left Scientology, as my own faith declined rapidly, I suddenly had access to all of these people. Hundreds of people were coming to me and asking me questions. And so in return, I'd say, what was it that convinced you that Scientology was a good thing? And it was almost always the training routine 0 or a book 1 session. And so with most of us, I think we became involved. Of course, in your case, you were born into it. Well, you were 6 when your parents got into it, so you're a second generation. But for those of us who were converts, it wasn't so much a, wow, incredible awe experience, I'm now doing Scientology, though I have met that. That's how Sarge Gabodi got in, a session that his friend Gary French gave him. And, you know, this is the only psychiatrist in Scientology, bless him.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a bit of a contradiction there, but lovely man. But for most of us, we were offered a solution to our problems. And then somewhere along the way, we got high and had this great experience. And for me, TR0 was meaningless because I'd been meditating for a year. So I knew that staring at things gave you the Ganzfeld effect and made you feel high, you know. But it was that session where I was in Judea that, you know, suddenly there's this thing, that this sense of different perception. And I think it's the Book of E-meter drills where Hubbard lists preclear originations. The colors in the room are brighter. I have an awful feeling of fear. He actually lists things which any hypnotist recognizes as typical hypnotic effects. And I'm sure he recognized them as that as well, and wanted to say, well, when they say, hey, I'm in a hypnotic state, you go, thank you. I'll repeat the auditing question.
Right.
So I think we have done reasonably well today. I think is your needle floating?
We generally do reasonably well.
Reasonably well, yeah.
For relatively intelligent people.
Relatively intelligent people. But we are former cult members, and so therefore our judgment.
We have an excuse. Yeah. Yes. Well, it's actually a good excuse. Always. It's the perfect excuse. I mean, it may be a red letter painted on our foreheads, but at least we can say, yeah, but that's why. That's why I'm like incompetent, incapable, unfeeling, foolish idiot.
I liked it when Richard Dawkins, King of the Atheists, put forward the, you know, and I'm not into any belief system, atheism or otherwise. Sorry, I've done that. I was a cult member. But he put forward the idea that atheists could have T-shirts with a scarlet letter A on them, and going, look at Nathaniel Hawthorne and see what you're advocating. You know, what a ridiculous!
Oh my God,
adulterer! Never mind. They have Sunday services now, and they sing songs about not God.
No kidding.
Yeah, we have no God. We are happy. It's like, oh, come on. Yeah, there are hundreds of them all around the world now. Sunday meetings for atheists. Brilliant. Get into the atheist cult.
Well, at least they could have done it on Thursday at 2 or something. Be a little more
Thursday
original.
at 2 would be much better. Yeah, why Sunday? I think you should have Friday off because of the Muslims, Saturday off because of the Jews, Sunday off because of the Christians. I think it's Tuesday for certain Hindus. So we could get down to the 3-day week.
There you go.
Be great.
There you go. That's excellent. That's a good plan.
I'm
all down for that.
Yeah. God, wouldn't it be a wonderful thing? But yeah, not in our lifetime, probably. Perhaps in the lifetime of our grandchildren.
Yep.
Or their grandchildren. Still, lovely talking with you, Mike.
And, you too, John. As always,
we'll get together again soon. Thank you so much. And as L. Ron Hubbard said to our listeners, I'm going to quote exactly: "Thank you for listening. I write just for you, even though I don't know your name." What a liar!
Bye, John.
Bye, Mike. Thanks a lot. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.